Hello everyone, I'm Rahul. I'm a freshman majoring in CS, and this is my Flask workshop. So before I begin talking about Flask, these are just the things that I'm going to be using during this demo. And if you want to follow along, you can like download this. So first thing is Postman. What Postman basically is that it offers a user interface that makes it easier to make like HTML requests or like GET or POST requests through to communicate with like the application. This is like very useful if you want to like test the code. So I'm going to be using that during the demo if you want to download that. You'll also need Python because Flask is written in Python, and you'll need ngrok. What ngrok is basically it creates an internet address that allows people to run your program out of like a specific port on your local host. And this is good for like testing your services or if you want to demo your project in front of like a group of people. So I'm going to be using ngrok, and you obviously need to also install Flask. And you can hold off on this until we actually make like the projects directory. And I'm going to be using PyCharm, but Notepad works for a text editor. Okay, so before we go into like actually programming Flask, let me just like briefly go into what Flask actually is. So Flask is a web framework written in Python that provides you with the tool to deploy web applications. So you might be asking like, what is a framework? And what a framework basically is that it's pre-developed software that you can use and build upon, and it takes care of like some of the low-level functionality, so you can like program like more high-level programs and stuff. So a reason why you'd want to use like frameworks is one, it avoids redundancy. So like if there's like parts of your program that uses like the same type of code, using a framework would help with that because it'll have it written for you. So you can just use a built-in function. It reduces bugs because the parts that are coded for you have been tested. It saves time programming because you can just use the built-in function instead of having to spend time to write your own function. And it also makes writing high-level programs easier, as I said earlier. So you may be asking, like, what's the difference between a framework and a library? And the key difference is what's known as IOC, which is inversion of control. And what inversion of control is basically in libraries, when you want to use a function, your code basically calls that function from the library. But when you're using frameworks, that relationship is inverted. So basically, the framework calls your program code, and it also calls the library code. And that might be a little confusing. So I think the best way to think of it is like a framework provides like the structure for your code, like your program, whereas libraries given like other built-in functions after you have already coded your program. So basically, it's also not mutually exclusive. So you could use frameworks and libraries together. But basically, the main difference is who's in control. If you're using a framework, the framework's in control. Whereas if you're using just solely libraries without a framework, it's the user. Another thing to note is that Flask is a micro framework versus like a regular framework. And what that basically means is that there are a lot less dependencies and more flexibility, which gives power to the developer for what plugins they want to include. So for example, let's say like there's certain built-in functions that you don't want to use in a given framework. It might be better to use a micro framework, and Flask is a micro framework, which gives you a lot of flexibility. And you can use Flask to host websites, blogs, update databases, basically anything that requires like a web application. Um, so that's just basically what Flask is and the basics of what you need to know about it. So let's like get into like starting to create programs using Flask. So I'm going to be using PyCharm. Let's create a new Python file. I'm going to call it firstprogram.py just because it's our first program. Cool. So the first thing that we need to do is obviously import Flask. So it's lowercase first, and then uppercase, I believe. And then now we want to initialize our application or make an instance of Flask. So the way we would do that is in Python, you don't have to worry about like the type of variables. You can just like type it out. So app equals Flask underscore name underscore underscore. So it's two underscores before name and two underscores after name. And what this basically does is app is an instance of Flask, and you would use this for like database connections or handling requests or authentications. So inside Flask it says underscore underscore name underscore underscore. And what this is it's basically the name of the program. So like first program.py. Okay. Um so we want to set a root. So what a root is basically you could think of it kind of like a URL, and this URL is like how you would like access your program, or like send what you would send requests to. So app at app.root and the slash inside. This is like you can treat it like a wrapper. So anything that you put after this would execute when you access localhost slash. So let's define a function. Since we're starting off basic, let's do something like hello world. Um, define hello underscore world. Okay, so we just want to return hello world for our first program. So the way you do that is just a basic return statement, return hello world. And now we want to run our app. So the way you do that is if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals main, and this just checks that the module you're running is the main module, then it's going to run the application. So if you're following along, you also need to import Flask wherever, whatever directory you're in. Okay, cool. So the first thing we need to do is run ngrok. As I said earlier, it allows you to run your program at a specific port or host. So for our program, I'm going to use HTTP 5000. Now, something to note here, right here, this is like the address that it creates. So technically, if you wanted to, you could put this into Postman and you could run it on your computer. But for our intents and purposes, let's just run our own programs, just because it doesn't take. There's like a limit to how many people can run your program at the same time. So this is ngrok. Now let's try sending a request to our program. This is Postman. So this is what I was saying earlier about providing a user interface for sending post or GET requests. What a GET request is when you want to get something from the program, and post request is when you want to send something to the program. So what we wrote here, since we didn't specify, we're doing a GET request. And we want to, whenever we run this program, and whenever we access that port on localhost, we want it to return hello world. So let's try sending a GET request to localhost right now. First thing we need to do is run our program. Python 3 first program.py. Okay, so you'll get this, and just this means your Flask app is running currently. Now we want to send a request to our program, and it returns hello world. So that's just like a basic app for using Flask. Let's do something more interesting or more complicated. So let's make a blog. It's going to be a very basic blog. You can't do much with it, but it's just an example of what you can do with Flask. So we can keep this import statement. You can keep this, and you can keep this. We won't need hello world anymore. Let me check if you guys have been sending anything, because I actually can't see I can't see the chat from the screen. Okay. Cool. Just let me know if you guys need time to program it. Okay. So let's start with our second program. I'm not gonna change the name of it just to keep it simple. But we want to do a blog. Now, what do we want to put in our blog? Let's say we want to put our date. We want to put the content of the blog entry, and we also want to put the name of the entry. So for that, we would probably need input from the user. So we want to import the request library, so we can take requests from the user at a given port. So for our first route, I think it's probably best if we just keep it for actually creating the blog. So we're gonna call it define it as blog. And for now, I'm just gonna leave this blank because I think it's better if we first finish our writing function. So we're gonna do that at app.root/write. So notice I put /write here. So this means when we want to execute our write function, we would do that localhost/write instead of just localhost. Cool. So now we want to program our write function. For this, I think a good tool to use is probably JSON. So we're going to import the Json library. And what JSON is it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And what that is basically like a file format that's written in human readable text. And it's used to transfer data or store data. And it has like values and pairs, kind of like a dictionary. And it's easy for humans to write, and it's easy for machines to generate. So that's why we're using it. It also has like an array function. So like you could use arrays and collections of objects, which is useful for our intents and purposes since we're creating a blog. So we can create a collection of entries. So the first thing we probably want to do is we want to open up a JSON file. So the way you would do that in Python is file. You can call the file whatever it is. I'm just going to call it file. I'm going to do open blog.json. And so the first parameter of your open function is going to be the name of the file that you're writing. And then the second parameter is going to be whether you're going to write with it or whether you're going to read it. So if you're reading it, then it's going to be R. If you're writing into it, it's going to be W. So since we're going to be reading it, we're going to do R. Okay, cool. Now we want to load everything that's already in the JSON file into something that's readable. So we'll do blog equals JSON.load file. So obviously right now we don't have a JSON file, but when we're actually executing this program, we want to make sure that if the file does exist, we want to get all of the contents of the file into blog so it doesn't get erased beforehand. So this is why we're doing this first. Cool. So now we don't really need this instance of the file, so we can close it. And it's always a good practice to close files after you opened it and after you finish using it. Okay. So now we want to read data in from user input. And the way we would do that is we have to use our request library. So let's call entry, let's make entry the name of the variable that's used to store input from the user. And we're going to call the get JSON function so that we can get the input from the user. So let's say we make a post request. If we call request.getJSON, whatever the user did put into the post request is going to be put into entry. Also, one more thing over here, we need to specify whether we're handling a get request or a post request. So we do methods equals post. So this specifies that we're going to be using a post request. Cool. Okay. So now that we have entry, which is equal to request.get_JSON, let's start adding that into our blog. So the way you do that is, let's make a collection called blog post. And we're going to append the entry into the blog post. So this will just add it to the end of the collection. And then if we want to put it back into the file, we can open up the file again. And this time we'll open it with write. And then we can dump it back into the file. And then we can close the file. Oops. C syntax. File.close. Cool. So let's just make the JSON file so we have the structure already. File. And we're going to call it blog.json. So the way we're going to structure our JSON file is we're going to have a collection object called blog post. And JSON, instead of using equals, we used a colon here. And this is like the key and then the value, kind of like a dictionary. So this is going to be like an array, and it's going to be an array of objects. And then when we want to append something to this array of objects, we would call our write method. And this is our write function. Cool. So let's just see if this works first. Okay. So every time you update your Python file, you want to relaunch Flask so it knows what instance of the program it is. So now that we relaunch Flask, let's try sending a message to localhost/write. This time you want to do a post request. So make sure you put post over here. We want to go to body. And we want to go to raw. And we want to go to JSON. So I already have this from before, but this is kind of the structure of our JSON. So this is the object that we're going to send as a post request. We have three keys and 3 values. The first key is going to be date. I set it equal to 415. Let's just update it to 417. First post. Yeah, that's just a Shakespeare quote. But so if I send this to the server, what it's supposed to do is that it's supposed to append it to the JSON file that we just created. So it's gonna create an object with these three keys, and it's gonna put it into the blog post array. So let's see if that works. So return done. That means it should have worked. Also, if we check here, we see that it sent 200. 200 means that it worked. If you see 400, it usually means there's error in the input. If you see 500, it's usually a problem with the program. So as we see here, it updated our JSON file, and it put in this object, the date, the body, and the title. So every time we add something to our JSON file, it's gonna update this. Every time we send a post request, it's gonna update our blog.json file. So let's send like something else. Second post. It's taking a while. Okay, so it updated. I don't know why it was lagging. That sometimes happens when you use Flask, it lags. I had to press Control-C one time to make it send at 200. But this is our updated blog.json. So it has two posts right now. But let's say that now we want to access this somehow. So that's what we have this function for. I think since we can't like return directly to the user without using like JSON in JSON format, let's put all the blog entries into its own file. So we're gonna make an instance of another file, and we're gonna call it blog. We're gonna call it blog.text. Text. And we're gonna read it. Write it. Okay. Now we also want to open our JSON file. So let's call that JSON file equals open blog.json to put it in the string blog.json. We're going to read from that file. Like we did in our write function, we want to store all the entries from blog.json into readable data. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to call it blog posts, and we're going to set it equal to json.load json underscore file. And now that we're done with using the json underscore file, we can just close that. Cool. So now we have our blog post stored in this variable, and we have a new file that we can write into. So let's try looping through our entries. I'm gonna create a variable. I'm gonna call it entries, and we want all the everything that's stored in this collection. So the way that we can access this collection is we take what's loaded from here in blog posts, and then we access that object, that collection, by doing blog posts names might be a little confusing, but I could change that. Let's just call this blog. Cool. Blog post. So now entries contain all of these entries only. So we'll have like as its first object, it'll have this. As its second object, it'll have this. And if we had more objects within this collection, it would also be stored in entries. Since we want to iterate through it and then print it into our new file, let's create a for loop. So we're going to use an enhanced for loop. For each post in entries, we're going to want to write it into this file that we created over here. So file, right? Let's say the first thing that we want to write in is our date. And then we want to have a new line after each data point. And then we can just do that for all the data points in our object. And then let's just keep a line after each entry, just so that there's space in between. Cool. So what this should do is it should write every single entry into a new file called blog.txt that we'll soon be able to read. Let's close blog.txt since we're done with it. And then we can just return done. Oh, well, we already returned done here. So let's just clean up space. Okay, cool. So let's test this out. Again, since we updated our Python file, we want to close out of this server and then launch it again. So now we want to send a GET request because we want to get the file. And we want to do it at localhost port 5000 or whatever port that you put. And we'll send a GET request. And then return done. So this should create the file. 200. And so there it is. The first blog entry, the second blog entry. And if you were to add more entries to it, it would create the file. So in terms of coding projects, that's pretty much all I had. But I can also show an example of a program that I made during HackRU that used APIs and libraries. So I can show you that right now. We won't need this anymore. Also, if you guys didn't catch any of that, or if you want to access what I coded earlier, I have a link over here for both the programs and also instructions. I can send this slide to you guys right now. Okay, cool. Um, so this is just a program that me and my friends made. Ignore the name. I don't know why it's called Emoji Pasta. But what it basically did was if we texted a number on our phone with two Rutgers locations as well as like a timestamp, it would tell us the fastest route to get from that one location to another location, and it would message you on your app on your phone. So we use the Twilio API. We also use Flask. And this is just an example of how you can mix and match and use frameworks as well as like APIs and libraries. And it's kind of long, a lot of hard coding. So basically, what we did was we imported Flask for the server, and then we used Twilio so that we could message your phone with certain messages, depend and also accept text messages that have like the things I mentioned earlier with the time and the locations. And then we also imported the Google Maps API. So the way we use Google Maps API was that we created different sectors across the campus based on like Livy, Bush, Cook Doug, and College Ave. And I can actually run this app right now. The problem with you guys actually like being able to send the messages is that Twilio requires you to have like verified caller IDs, and I don't want you all to like send your numbers and stuff. But I could share my phone and just show you how it could work. So let me just enter the ngrok address, and this changes every time you run ngrok. So let me start that up. When you're running ngrok, you have to make sure it's in the same folder that you download to or that you send it to. So we're gonna run on port 5000 again. And this is the ngrok address I was talking about earlier, where you could share this with someone. They could basically run your service on that same address if you put this into like Postman or something like that. Okay, cool. So now that I updated that, I can actually run our application. Okay, I'm gonna quickly switch to my phone to share a screen. Let me mute myself just in case there's like feedback. Okay, cool.
Okay. I'm gonna use my phone to talk just because it's easier. And I'm gonna share my content from my phone. Okay, cool. So the way this works is you have your first location and you have your second location and you also have a timestamp. So since I'm using Flask, let me just keep that over here. Okay. So let's say we want to know the quickest way from Livy Dining Hall to Bush Dining Hall. And then we can input like basically any time, so 10 o'clock. And this runs on military time. So if we enter that, now, hold on 1 second. Oops, I accidentally exited out of Ngraph. Let me restart that. Okay. So let me resend the message. This time it should work because I have Ngraph set up. Okay, so now it's looking for the quickest bus route to get there. And it's gonna print out quickest bus route. So B, and the closest bus stop is Lippy Plaza. So that's just a cool app that I made. And just shows like you can use like different APIs, you can use different libraries, and you can use in conjunction with Flask, and you can make like cool stuff like this. So that's pretty much all I had. Thanks for coming.